What is Taqiyya?
It's a doctrine that tells Muslims you can dissemble your true intentions. Muhammad himself said, war is deceit. Smile to the face of the infidel while your heart curses them. There's another even deeper doctrine, which I translate as
Schools across the north of England are now being told you can't draw Jesus.
the more liberal the culture becomes, the more it actually is repulsive to Muslims. The Western mind seems to think they're going to like us. To the Muslim mind, that just breeds more and more contempt.
Look how weak they are.
All I have to look at is just demographics. The official numbers they give the UK at 8 or 9%, which means about 15, 20%. What do you do when England is 50% Muslim? Between around the year 1000 and 1500, 80 million Hindus were slaughtered. They're aggressive and bold and they want their way. And if you protest, well, you're an evil Islamophobe and you're going to jail. I just came across a Winston Churchill quote. You won't fight now when you actually have a good chance. And you may even be able to win without even much bloodshed. The time will come when you will have to. I give you a jar of candies. There's 100. 10 of these are poison. Now here, go give it to your kids. The burden of proof has to be on you, not me. And I'm sorry, but you're part of a religion that makes it like that.
Raymond Ibrahim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.
Happy to have you here. Tell me a little bit. We're going to cover a lot in Islam. In fact, before I go into it, I'm going to ask you about Iran, but I want to know a little bit about your background and what you write about and research.
All right. So my background is, we have to start very personal, apparently. We have to be personal so we can understand. I come from, my family's from Egypt. They're the Copts, Coptic Christians. They left Egypt. I was born in the United States. They left in the late 60s. I was born in early 70s. And anyway, so I tell you that because obviously I had an interest in that world, Christians and Muslims and what happens there in that nexus. And I also heard stories from my family, etc. And then fast forward, I majored in history. We were talking about Fresno State, BA and MA, and maybe you know Victor Davis Hanson, of course, was my professor at the time. So that was a fun time, and my master's thesis actually with him. He was the department chair. Was about the first battle between Muslims and Christians. So I was still very much interested in that, and I had also been studying the various languages, Greek, Arabic, and then 9/11 happened, and I decided to continue my studies, and I went to Georgetown University, which at the time was one of the most prestigious universities for that field, Islam, Middle East. I went there. I didn't like it. I got all A's, but I was still young and naive. I didn't understand about political correctness and the academic narrative and how they were bent on showing Islam's good. And I was just treating things objectively. But so I didn't like it. I was doing well, but then I got a job at the Library of Congress, dealing again with Middle Eastern Arabic books and that field, and that was an amazing job. And before long, it became a full-time job. It was 40-hour a week. And before long, I also came across writings in Arabic that were written by Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda. And this was still when Al-Qaeda was big news. I found these in 2004, so just a few years after 2001. And what was interesting about these writings in Arabic is they were completely different than what Al-Qaeda had been sending messages to the West saying. So previously, Al-Qaeda's message was, we attacked you because you attacked us first. It's all about reciprocal treatment. You've done this, that, and the other thing. Israel, you and Israel are torturing everyone. Colonialism, crusades, what you people have done to us. So the whole narrative was this big, long grievance mantra. Okay, even at one point, he was complaining that the U.S. didn't sign on to the Kyoto Protocol, believe it or not, about the environment. Yeah,
that's specific.
Yeah, he actually mentioned that. So those were the messages that were being disseminated to the West. And the media, Western media, was helping because they want to show you what the other side is saying. What I came across in Arabic, though, said the exact opposite. It sounded more like ISIS, because now he's talking to fellow Muslims in Arabic, not thinking no infidel is going to be privy to this information. And it was basically, we have to hate and war against them because they're infidels. It has nothing to do with what they do, whether they're good or kind to us or bad or evil. We have to subjugate them. So,
can you do me a favor? If you get value from these conversations, hit subscribe.
I want to, on that point, because I spoke last week at the European Parliament about the Islamification of Europe. And an imam was there sort of giving the other side. And he said, no, what infidels really means, and I'm sure you know where this is going, is it's just sort of non-believers, but even atheists are fine as well. So it's not actually Christians and Jews and so on. I imagine you'd dispute that.
Yeah, well, we can definitely get into the the linguistic aspects, and I would like to say that something about that. But if I finish the story,
Sure.
I think it'll be good, because so then when I wrote that, so I got a book deal of the Arabic thing because I wanted to show what Al-Qaeda had been saying to Muslims versus what they said to non-Muslims, and it came out in my first book, the Al-Qaeda Reader, which was finally published in 2007, and so anyway, that very early on initially struck me as a perfect example. I came from, again, academic background studying history, so I was very much interested in jihad and crusades. But when I came across the Al-Qaeda thing, I believed originally what they were saying, which is, oh, we're doing this because you've done this. So when I read in Arabic what they were really saying and how they were referencing history to solidify their point and talking about, yes, we are the nation of the jihad, et cetera, I thought that has stayed with me really since from then to now. And so one of my writing missions is just to show the continuity, the true continuity between Islamic hostility for the West, past and present, and also all the many lies that permeate it, past and present, because we have the same examples of deception and lies and all that sort of thing going on. As far as infidel, it's funny because they come up with all these apologetics, and I think what he's trying to tell you is, so the word infidel, well, that's an English word. It's not even necessarily a good translation. I use it often. The word is kafir in Arabic, and it's true. So a kafir is a non-Muslim. You can translate it as a non-Muslim, but that's their way of trying to make it hygienic, because what it is a non-Muslim, but the word is loaded with so many pejoratives and evil connotations. Okay, so by default, to be a non-Muslim based on this word is to be an enemy. Okay. So, and maybe the other things that they play with is they'll call Christians and Jews people of the book.
That's what he was angling at.
Right. Ahlul Kitab, which is, so if you're Ahlul Kitab, a people of the book, yes, you are technically better, to be treated better than the kafir, but it's not a whole lot better. The kafir is you submit, convert to Islam, or die. That's it. The Christian and the Jew is submit, become Muslim, or fine, keep your religion, pay tribute, and be a second-class citizen, and or more like a third-class citizen if you really understand it. So it's marginally better, but the war is to be waged on both until they submit one way or the other. The only difference is the Christian and Jew has the right to maintain their faith, but they are suppressed subjects. Quran 9:29 is the key one, which says, "Fight the people of the book until they pay tribute and feel themselves humbled." So it's not just about taking money from them. You have to make sure that in the social order that they are suppressed. And one of the reasons for that is in the hopes that eventually they convert. And they did. That is actually the history of how Islam spread. It would conquer regions, let's say Egypt, my ancestral homeland, or Syria. The vast majority of the people there were actually Christians, the overwhelming majority, with also a lot of Jews in Alexandria. And so they had the right to pay tribute, but before long, people have no money. It's a demanding amount of tribute that they want, and people get tired of being social outcasts. They can't get jobs. They are despised. They can't so they become Muslims. That's the true story of the spread of Islam, and it's actually understood that this Jizya tax, based on the Quran, is on the one hand to show some leniency, and on the other hand, it's kind of we get money out of you, and then eventually you become a Muslim.
So I didn't actually realize it worked that way. I thought what was happening was, looking at the Middle East, and I've got a very fleeting knowledge of it, that they would come in, taking over, killing the non-believers, and that's how Islam spread. But you're saying actually people were just converting because it was so difficult not to.
Yeah, there was a lot of social. So yeah, if you were a Christian or Jew, you were technically given the object. Now I'm giving you the actual law, the way it's understood. I'm sure historically there were all sorts of aberrations where they didn't even give the Christians or Jews and they killed them outright. And there were even times when they got, so for example, the Hindus, they're not people of the book. So theoretically, when the massive jihad began on them, it's supposedly between around the year 1000 and 1500, 80 million Hindus were slaughtered, okay, during this period. And technically, they were not supposed to give them the opportunity to pay tribute and keep their religion. But if eventually it got so bad that they figured, you know what, why don't we just make money out of this? What's another dead Hindu? So they did give them that status that they could pay and keep the religion. So my point is there's always some elasticity to these rules depending on how they work. But and there was even a time when very early on where a lot of the subject peoples wanted to convert because of the social pressures and the financial pressures, but the caliphs wouldn't let them. Because once you convert, that's their income drops because they don't get that extra tax. So it was actually more advantageous for the caliphs to have their subject people not be Muslim. That was a whole controversy, but eventually it went away.
But gradually, these countries did become Muslim. Sometimes some of them was in the last few hundred years, and sometimes in the last like 50, 60 years, right? Iran, Afghanistan, you see those pictures, don't you, of people, women in dresses and things. What are the most recent ones? Would that be Iran and
most recent nations that have become Muslim?
Yeah,
the UK, France. Oh, yeah, you're asking more.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that. That's the most recent, I suppose.
Yeah,
and well, it's a fact, isn't it? I mean, was it the UAE that recently banned its students from doing exchange in the UK because of radicalization?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Places like in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, the Muslim Brotherhood is banned. The Muslim Brotherhood was born in Egypt. So if anything, it has a lot of sympathizers there, but it's banned. And yet in the West, it's not often.
Why?
You tell me. Because even at that point, you can't even be accused of Islamophobia because Muslims are banning them. It's a terrorist organization. Okay, whether it has an Islamic veneer or it's substantially Islamic, those Muslims are banning it. And that doesn't make them Islamophobe. So I don't know why the West has any compunction about banning a terrorist organization.
What's the best argument you can give that for the left? What do we call it? Steelman or strongmanning?
Oh, straw man argument?
The opposite, like building up the best possible other side.
Yeah.
For a lefty
right.
who would be saying now, no, that's not going to happen. What happened in Iran, Afghanistan, Lebanon,
right.
Egypt
won't happen here.
It's not going to happen here. Yeah. What's the best argument for them?
For them? In other words, if I was one of them?
If you were one of them, what would you say? Hang on, it's not going to happen in Britain. Here's why.
Okay, so you're asking me to think like I'm insane and come up with a very strong argument. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, well, what would they say at least?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, that's a good question. I've never put my mind into theirs. That's a scary thought. But what they would say that is, so in other words, would they rationalize that, yeah, the current situation is not so bad. This isn't going to become Londonistan or a new caliphate.
Yeah.
I think because of a lot of it has to do with naivete and a little bit of cultural arrogance. They're just probably convinced that in due time, all the Muslims that come here will just assimilate and secularize because, everyone knows the truth is secularization and that's the objective happy life. And, they can only do this draconian Sharia so much. And I'm sure they'll all eventually, one way or the other, just assimilate. But it's really the opposite because if anything, if you look at who gets radicalized, it's the later generations, the second and third generations. And I have a deep theory about that. It's a symbiotic relationship, actually, that Western liberal, and the more liberal the culture becomes, the more it actually is repulsive to Muslims. And it pushes them back on their conservative ways because they see. So when they see, for example, in the UK or wherever, Western people, English people, appeasing them, covering up their crosses so they don't offend them, inviting them to come and proclaim Quran truths in the church and all that. The Western mind seems to think, see, they're going to like us because we're showing them up. To the Muslim mind, that just breeds more and more contempt and really reaffirms that, yeah, we have the truth. See, even they know it.
Look how weak they are.
Yeah. So that's why I think there's that. That's it, and there's the opposite of that actually. If you go back to the colonial era when the West was unabashedly proud of its ways and it went into the Islamic world and into India and Africa, and it didn't, as they say, pussyfoot around. It was very objective and proud of its strength. Well, what did the Muslims do? Did they scream jihad? Actually, by and large, they all tried to emulate it. And they all shaved the beard and put on Western dress, and women were not wearing the hijab, and they were in dress, high heels. And even the number one country or empire, the Ottoman Empire, which at once was the greatest scourge of Europe from a jihadist mentality, they were the first ones to get rid of all that and totally become westernized under Ataturk. They even got rid of the Arabic script and adopted the Roman alphabet for the Turkish language. So that's what I mean by a symbiotic relationship. In as much as the West exudes power and confidence, that actually attracts Muslims and makes them want to emulate and assimilate. In as much as it exudes weakness and just this pathetic kind of culture, that draws them back and repulses them and makes them want to conquer them. It's almost like the bully. I call it the schoolyard bully mentality. If you're just weak and kind of like pathetic, he starts off testing you, how far I can go with you, and the more you give in, the more aggressive he becomes, right? Mm-hmm. But if you give him a swift punch in the nose, before you know it, he respects and becomes your best friend. Yeah. Okay, so I think that very much governs how Muslims see the West.
It's when you put it that way, it seems so obvious that is basic human psychology, and yet this leftist narrative persists. We just had, as you'll probably be aware, I mean, firstly, we had with the education, what you're talking about, literally schools, I think across the north of England at the moment, it might spread further south, are now being told you can't draw Jesus. Yeah. Jesus can't be drawn. That might offend Muslims. We also had Gorton and Denton in the north of England. They just lost. It was one of the first big, votes that was really lost based on sectarian voting. The Greens won. And a lot of the left are now saying, you guys thought that Muslims were socially conservative, but they've just voted for a gay Jew in charge of the Greens. And I've never heard them mention the environment. The Greens don't talk about the environment, even though they're supposed to be the Greens. What would your rebuttal be to those people?
That the Muslims see them all as useful idiots. And I'll give you a perfect example. In Michigan, Hamtramck, I think it's pronounced. It's somewhere in Michigan, a smaller city, which has a large Muslim population. And, when it was a small Muslim population, who welcomed them in and who tried to buttress them and support them was the extreme left, okay? And the more woke, the more they helped them, okay? And before long, it became, I don't know if the city's Muslim majority, but once the city council became Muslim majority, the first thing they did is cancel gay pride, okay? And the left, the people who had supported them just freaked out and said, well, we helped you, we thought this and that. But that's a perfect example of, the Muslims will adroitly ride the wave that helps them, even if it is with leftists, Jews, gays, whatever. But when the time comes and and this has an old lineage in the Islamic mentality, even Muhammad himself would do that sort of thing. When the time comes, then, the mask comes off, as it were.
I think it's very possible that probably not the next election, but the one after that, so we're talking about 7 or 8 years in the UK now, that the Greens as a kind of Islamo-woke alliance will get in charge. How will that look in the first few months and years?
Well, I see things differently. I really have I think the problem is too many people are myopic and they just really look at the current news and what's being said today. But I like to stand back, and maybe it's with my background in history, and kind of look at the long picture. And all I see is just a slow degrade, okay, in the UK, but just the West in general. And all I have to look at is just demographics. That's it. Okay. If I look and, the official numbers they give, let's say the UK, I think the official is what, 8 or 9%?
Yeah.
Which means about 15, 20%.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay.
The last census was 5 years ago. We've had millions of people come in since then.
Right. So it's already significantly higher. Just closing the border or preventing illegals from coming in seems to be this massive, hard thing to do, even in the U.S., as we see with the whole ICE thing. And the U.S. is a more cowboy society. You'd think it wouldn't be a big deal because they're trying to round up people who don't belong here, and most of them are criminals. And you can see all the meltdowns. So can you imagine something like that happening here in the UK? I find that very difficult to conceive. So even if you could slow down the immigration, the fact that they're reproducing much, much faster. So it's impossible at this point. Every decade, and I've already saw, for example, a Pew study said in Germany, something like in 20 years, it's going to be, 25% Muslim. And then what? And then how about in 30 years? So in other words, just the status quo with nothing crazy happening and people and politicians bickering over the little tiny minutia that never matters, okay, and saying we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and none of it is, and time progresses. Numbers are going to keep growing and keep growing and keep growing. And then what do you do when England is 50% Muslim at that point? or I mean 30%. What do you do at that point? And they're aggressive and they're bold and they want their way, and the dumb left is supporting them, and if you and they're in the government, and if you protest, well, you're an evil Islamophobe and you're going to jail. Okay, so that's what I foresee coming, and it's because I just came across a Winston Churchill quote, which I'll paraphrase, and he said it, I think, before in the context of World War II. About, I think at the time, let's say Britain's reluctance to enter the war. And the quote is, if you won't fight now, when, you actually have a good chance, and you may even be able to win without even much bloodshed, the time will come when you will have to fight, and you will have all the odds against you, and you'll probably lose. So I think that's, people are just putting their hope in this or that politician, party. I don't see any of them being able to undo what's been done, which is just, it's one thing to stop immigration, but like I said, the damage is done. You can stop it, and they're here now. Okay, and reverse migration to me sounds like a pipe dream. I don't think it's possible. Of course, anyone can do it, and but knowing what I know about the psychology of Western people, it would be so seen as so unhumanitarian. So they won't do it.
It will never happen.
They will never do it. And so the end result will be year after year, decade after decade, look for Muslim numbers to grow, and with it, influence and power and assertiveness.
And we'll become a Muslim country eventually.
Yeah.
Peter Boghossian is a mutual friend of ours, and he often says, I think no one knows if he's saying this facetiously. I don't think even he knows. But he says it's time to actually make a deal with the Muslims and just give up Europe, basically, or at least give up the UK. What do you make of that? And what's the alternative?
Yeah, I'm hoping he's said that to me on camera multiple times, and I'm assuming he's being facetious, because I mean, I don't think they have to do that right now, because they can just, why make a deal? Well, just continue sinking slowly. At least you have these few years where you can imagine yourself as being in authority. So what's the hurry to make a deal? And then later on you can. So I don't think they need to make a deal at this point. You can just let things happen organically. Just let them take over through numbers, and then eventually you'll get it in line one way or the other. So at least you have a few years before that.
The problem is, if you were to leave, the whole of Europe's gone. And I always held out this thought of, okay, let's say it got worst case scenario, somewhere like Texas, Arizona. You mentioned the sort of cowboy cavalier attitude. But that doesn't seem to be, are they going to hold up? Is there going to be anywhere?
That's the thing. That's, so the Texas, that shocked me, because in America, Texas is kind of like, that's the most redneck, no nonsense. We don't play around. Everyone's got their cowboy hat and gun. And then you turn around and find out it's becoming so Islam. It's like one of the most Islamized states in America. I don't know. The numbers that I hear, I haven't really confirmed them, of how many mosques are being built, rapidly, and like Islamization going on. It's just amazing if that state is going through that. Okay. And the same thing, like I told you, with the immigration and ICE, they're just enforcing a law that every country has, which is you can't break in here and live. And we're going after the criminals who are already engaged in crime. And just look at the meltdown that the general public is having. And so that's what I mean. Ultimately, all of these issues, you have to understand, all these problems are self-made. None of these are from the Muslims themselves. The Muslims are weak at this point of time. I write about history. I talk about when Muslims invaded and conquered, and the people of Europe or wherever fought back, and sometimes they were conquered, sometimes they weren't, and it was a bloodbath either way. Right now, Islam is completely weak compared to, let's say, Europe or America. So that's why when a lot of people complain, say Muslims are invading the UK. No, they're not. They're being invited into the UK. Let's be serious. You can stop them if you wanted to, easily. So I think the problem is all these, it's really an intellectual or epistemological problem where, the society has created all these barriers that have paralyzed it, that it can't act anymore because something about human rights or something about multiculturalism, these things have so dominated the way people think that they can't just engage in common sense or implement non-suicidal policies that are meant to preserve the host society. But the power is there. It could be done. That's why I say, the UK could easily get rid of the Muslim problem if it wanted to. It could engage in reverse immigration. It could do all sorts of things like take away all the economic boons that are given, which will make Muslims kind of be like, well, why am I out here in the cold getting nothing? Maybe I'll leave. So there's so much that can be done. The question is, Western people have been so, I don't know what's the best word here, but just
Castrated.
Yeah, good one. I was going to say emasculated. So emasculated and castrated that they just simply can't do what needs doing. They don't have the stomach for it because they have to be the good guy. I'm the tolerant, enlightened, open-minded, progressive.
Yeah.
And that's what's destroying and going to kill them. It's not the Muslims. The Muslims are a byproduct. I don't see them as a inherent issue. It's a byproduct. It could be nipped in the bud quickly. But look at a country like Hungary and Poland. They don't have this problem. Are they more powerful than the UK and Germany? I don't think so. All they did is put up a fence and said, no thanks. We're good.
So maybe those are the countries that
will be the remainder of the West.
Bloody hell. It's so crazy, all of this. I was recently, it's interesting what you're saying about the mentality, because I was recently in Israel and I went into the West Bank and all of these places and I met a lot of the Muslim Israelis there. And something really struck me was that they're very submissive. And that was not what I've been used to in the Muslim community in the UK. Obviously, there's all different kinds of people. I've met some wonderful Muslim people and some not so nice and so on. But they were sort of scared a little bit. I would ask them things on camera and they were a little bit scared, didn't want to say what those kinds of things, because I think they, sometimes not in a good way or sometimes in a good way, they're under the thumb of the Israeli government there. And it's something that it really struck me, because in the West, that is not how you see Islam. It made me think, okay, so if you did have you don't want an authoritarian regime, but a bit more authority.
Yeah, that goes back to sort of what I was saying about the bully mentality. If you're strong and authoritative, then they become meek, docile and responsive. If you're like, oh yeah, whatever you guys want, I'll do anything for you, then they become aggressive and violent. It is human nature, but it's especially has a long history amongst Muslim peoples.
What do you think of, the individual Muslims coming here, as you say, a lot of them just want economic security and a better prosperity and all those things. And a lot of them are good, nice people. Presumably most individuals who come here don't want to be under some kind of regime as they would be in Iran.
Presumably,
but then is that the hard thing? But if lots of them come at once, that's just the inevitability.
Yeah, because and that's one of the problems when they come in huge numbers. They don't assimilate because they just stay amongst each other. That's why you have here in this country, as I understand it, Muslims who've been living here for decades don't speak a word of English. Yeah. Okay, because they become ghettoized, they live in their own enclaves, and then guess what? Well, Islamic culture prevails because that's what they know. And so they never have a chance to assimilate. So if anything, that's one more reason not to have so many, because, and we've seen this before in other contexts and countries and nations, when you bring small amounts, then they can assimilate quickly because they have to be, they're amongst the whole society. But in this case, but again, you also have to be cognizant of this. I find this generational thing interesting. It's not the ones who came 20 years ago, first generation, and then he freaked out and said, I'm going to become a radical. It's the one that was born here or second generation or, like a grandkid who was born here. He's the one that turns to Islam. And I think it goes back to what I was saying, which is this sort of, repulsed by Western liberal culture. Again, this is the same idea we're talking about, the bully, Yeah. It doesn't, the more you, this is the kind of culture where the more you appease and cajole and try to give them what they want, they don't reciprocate and say, oh, what a gentleman, let me also be a gentleman. No, it's seen like, oh, he's weak, that's why he's doing that, because I'm stronger. And then it gives them confidence, and then they want more. So that's why I think those younger guys then fall back to their heritage because they find that that's the best way to respond to Western weakness.
What is taqiyya?
Taqiyya is it's an Arabic word. It's derived from the Quran 3:28. Long story short, it's a doctrine that tells Muslims you can dissemble around the non-Muslim if and when that non-Muslim has authority over you. So if you're a Muslim living in the UK, and you're outnumbered, obviously, by infidels, you can dissemble your true intentions. And as long as in your heart you're still a Muslim trying to do the Muslim stuff and whatever helps Islam and fellow Muslims. That's a broad umbrella term, but there's a host of other technical doctrines that also promote deception against the infidel. Muhammad himself said war is deceit on the one hand. On the other hand, according to Islamic doctrine, the Muslim world is at perpetual war with the non-Muslim world. They have an Arabic term, Dar al-Salam versus Dar al-Harb, right? And so until the Islamic world subsumes one way or the other, the non-Islamic world, they're at war. Now, even though it's perpetual and existential, there can be truces when the Muslims are weak. And so whenever they're weak, they can, of course, take time. It's not supposed to be suicidal. It's not like you have to always declare jihad, even though your enemy's so much more powerful. And that's sort of that's the phase we're in general with the Muslim world. But if war is deceit, and you can play around, and when you're weak, you don't have to engage in violence. Well, then you have a blank check to engage in Taqiyya 24/7. And a lot of clerks have said that, okay, because we're at war. So when they come, let's say here, well, you're the infidel. There's another even deeper doctrine, which I translate as loyalty and enmity in Arabic, al-wala' wal-bara', which is Muslims have to stay clean of non-Muslims and even hate them, okay? And they have to help and ally with Muslims. And they even say, even if the non-Muslim's good to you, you have to hate him. And even if the fellow Muslim's not good to you, you have to work with him. So it's like the ultimate tribalism, with a theological veneer. And that's very prominent because that's what prompts the jihad. Okay, if you're the other, this is ultimately, remember, a tribal mentality. What Muhammad did is he just deified the tribal mores of 7th century Arabia, which were such that we're one tribe and everyone outside the tribes are the enemy. They exist to be killed, plundered, enslaved. So now he took that same thing, but now it became not the other tribe. The other tribe of non-Muslims. So everyone else is a part of the other tribe. Therefore, we don't befriend them, but unless you have to. And then there's all sorts of well-known clerks who say, smile to the face of the infidel, but while your heart curses them. In other words, you have to do whatever you have to do as long as you remain Muslim. And one primary example happened during the Reconquista, where the Christians essentially drove the Muslims out of Spain. At the very, very end, when they were holed up in one final city, and the Christians said either convert or leave, they got a fatwa saying precisely this: Taqiyya. It was okay. You can go get baptized, Catholic nation. You can partake of the communion, go to their church, do everything, but remain a Muslim. And this went on. There's records, generation after generation. And I always quote, there's a Spaniard who writes, and he says, I think he was a priest. He says, these people were better Christians than us. They went to church more often. They seemed more pious. And then they found out at home they were Muslims preaching hatred for the infidel. And This was generation after generation. So that's how deep that can go. And I often wonder, I can't imagine Western Europe having the intelligence apparatus to even begin to understand, that deep psychology and how it actually impacts Muslim behavior.
It's funny because as you speak, I was thinking you've got a certain Javier Bardem look, and he's a Spanish actor who is about as woke as we're wearing the Palestine stuff and all of that. But you've got. Has anyone ever told you that before?
No, that particular actor.
Yeah, there's a bit of a Bardem, but in a good way. He's a handsome man.
Well, thank you.
But the Spanish are about as bad as anyone at this woke nonsense.
The Spanish spent 700-800 years, being terrorized and fighting to get Muslims out of their country. And this shows you again the dangers of not knowing your history.
Yeah. And
last I heard, they just gave a blanket check to 500,000 or 1 million Africans that just came up, and they said, okay, yeah, you can stay. They just don't get it. It's just amazing. This is the classic example of those who ignore history are destined to repeat it. But this is something that was taught in every school. That's the funny thing. Spain's patron saint is St. James Matamoros. You know what that means?
No.
St. James the Moor Slayer. And there's all the images of him are on a horse with a sword and then a bunch of turbaned dark guys underneath being stomped. Okay.
Well, they're not going to allow that to be celebrated anymore.
No, well, of course not. But I mean, the reason I tell you that is it shows you that, you know, Spain was forged in that environment of constant warfare with Muslims. And now all of a sudden, oh yeah, none of that matters. They were just bigots, and oh, we're in a new age of enlightenment, and you know, they didn't know how to live and coexist. You know, no, that's not it.
Pep Guardiola, the Manchester City manager, he's the worst of them, of all of that. The stuff he comes out with, and he's being paid huge sums by the Emirati, who seem to actually be. I mean, that's an interesting topic in and of itself, isn't it? Because they don't seem to be something to worry about, the Emirate states, as much as maybe the Pakistanis and so on. What's your take on that?
Look, if it's a Muslim state, if that person's a true Muslim, and this goes back to the, sort of what you were saying, you know, people coming for the good life and the moderates, it's just hard to tell because. Okay, his name is Muhammad, and he comes from a Muslim country, right? He may not know or care about Islam or, you know, the Quran, just like so many Jews and Christians, right? You call them Christians and Jews, but they're secular.
Yeah.
So you can, of course, have that with a Muslim, and they come, you know, for the good life or whatever. But even those people, you have to always remember, they still have the cultural Islamic thing in their mind. So you don't have to be an ISIS person a radical is someone who reads the Quran and he literally tries to implement the teachings of Sharia, Hadith and all that. The cultural Muslim, though, you know, he may not know any of this, but it's just part of his upbringing and he doesn't even know where it comes from. Okay, so something like deception, I'll be honest with you, that is very much imbued culturally amongst Muslim peoples. They probably don't even know the word taqiyya, a lot of them. They don't know where it comes from. But it's because it's so normalized, then it becomes it just permeates the culture.
Which begs the question, because there's a lot of people concerned that taqiyya aspect about, so our party in here Reform, they're the ones who are saying we're going to stop immigration and so on. And they're very much seen by some on the left as the anti-Muslim party. And yet it has people very high up in it who are Muslim, which I think is often done. I mean, the same reason that the Greens have got a gay Jew in charge of them. And so we've got Zia Youssef, we've got Layla Cunningham, who seem like brilliant speakers, really smart. Can the British people, and it seems unfair to even ask the question because they're such nice, lovely people and I've met them. Can the British people trust those people?
Can they? I don't know.
You can't trust any.
I'll tell you, it's like this. Here's another analogy I'll give you. Okay,
Yeah.
let's give Muslims the benefit of the doubt, and you know, even the most liberal sort of estimates I hear will say something like, you know, only 10% are radical, only 10% support the ISIS or whatever, you know, Al-Qaeda view. Let's go with that. I think it's bigger, the number, but let's go with 10%. So you know what that's like? That's like I give you a jar of candies. There's 100, and I know for a fact because I've already admitted 10% are radical. 10 of these are poison, all right? Now here, go give it to your kids. Would you?
No.
Because you know that, yeah, most of them are going to be good. But how do I tell which is the good one? I can't. So when you give me an analogy or the example that you said about this or that politician, how can you tell? I mean, we already know some are actively engaged in taqiyya and lying and are doing what they want to do. And we know that's a doctrine that's been going on forever. So how do I know that particular Muslim is doing that? And we also know some aren't, some, you know. But of course, here's what I think. The benefit of the doubt should not be, or the burden of proof should not be put on me. You see what I'm saying? It's in other words, it's really your problem, Mr. Muslim, because you come from this background and I know all this stuff about Islam and you may be innocent, but really the burden of proof has to be on you, not me, because if it's on me, I have to take that risk of the 100 candies and I don't want to take a risk. Even if it's one candy, I'm not going to take that risk. Okay. And I'm sorry, but you're part of a religion that makes it like that. So why do I have to be the one to take the risk? Even if you are innocent, you might be. I already said 90 out of 10. Maybe there's a 90% chance you're innocent. But I don't, and see, so that's what's happening actually. If you look at the politics today, that is what the authorities are doing. They'll tell you, we know there's a radical, but they're a minority, 10%. So, okay, it's worth it. We're going to bring him in and we're just going to have occasional lash outs and Muslims stabbing people and driving trucks and blowing things up. Okay, it's worth it for us, apparently. But if you said, I don't want any of that, okay, I really care about my people, And, that's just the way it is. And I'm sorry for all you good Muslims who are out there. But that's just, again, the burden of proof is on you. And you know how you can prove it? Well, I guess leave Islam. Even though that doesn't work because, like we already said, that could be a ruse. Yeah.
But it's something.
Yeah.
What about the Jews? Okay, a lot of people on the far right. I mean, I'm a Jew myself, a secular one, but a lot of people on the far right are suggesting the Jews have helped to bring this in. It's the great replacement theory and so on. And this is, we're not the mainstream. If that's true, then I want to know. Is there truth in some Jewish people doing that?
Honestly, I don't know, and I hear this, but my take is always this. The only good thing about the Western system is it's technically transparent, which means we know where the buck stops and who makes the decisions, right? In the UK, it would be Starmer.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know, is he Jewish? Okay, so he's the one that all the pressure needs to be put on him because he's making a decision. Now, whether there's a secret cabal behind him who's telling him to do this or not is really kind of an irrelevant point. He's the guy that was chosen. He's the guy that makes the decisions. He's the guy that has to be held accountable.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. I think that makes more sense.
Yeah. And the guy's responsible for the most immigration.
Yeah.
Was the Conservative Party. That was David Cameron, Boris Johnson.
They're the ones who are doing it. I don't, if George Soros is floating behind their back or whatever the case may be, you're still the guy that's doing it.
But that's where the accusation comes from, doesn't it? It's the Soros.
Yeah.
It's there is a contingent of very left-wing Jews, just as there are right-wing and centrist Jews
I hear
as
that
well.
too, yeah.
Those guys do vote for left-wing policies often.
Right.
But a lot of immigrants do, don't they? They come to a country and then they all start, which is, I think, that's the case it seems to be as well. A lot of the parties on the left seem to be admitting almost, and that they're bringing in more and more immigrants to vote for them.
Well, the Spain example, I'm pretty sure, I told you they took in like 500 million. They literally, some politician was a woman. I saw a video and she's boasting and she's saying, so you can replace the racist right-wing voters. Literally.
They just admit it.
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
It's so obvious now. It's the cat's out of the bag, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. What about things like, I mean, have you seen King Charles? Like it's actually gotten nuts the last year. I mean, do you follow? I mean, you're in the States.
Not a whole lot, but I mean, I'm familiar. Yeah.
It's the football stadiums. Firstly, that's one of the biggest cultural institutions, and stadium after stadium, the football teams on Twitter, the soccer teams for Americans, are having prayers being held, Islamic prayers in the stadia. We've got King Charles constantly holding in the palace Muslim prayers and things like that. Are we further gone than people even realize?
Yeah, I actually spoke with someone recently about King Charles, and he made an interesting point. He said, well, he does that because he's, it goes back to sort of the colonial era, and he feels like he's the king of all the people, subject peoples, many of who are Muslims. So he has to represent them too. Okay, so, I suppose that makes a little bit of sense. But having said that, I just don't think that any nation, any culture, any civilization, let's say Britain, should in any way, shape, or form moderate, water down, or suppress its culture to accommodate anyone. And the reason for that is nobody does that. Muslims don't do that. Hindus don't do that. Buddhists don't do that. Okay, who does that?
Japanese don't do
Nobody do that, and they shouldn't, because this is our land, this is our law, this is our culture. You assimilate. So when I see that sort of thing, which I'm seeing both with Charles and just everyone else, all politicians and the overall. I heard, for example, last Christmas, some countries would, especially that have large Muslim populations, would make the images, the traditional images, they'd make them more bland, so you don't even know what you're looking at. Like let's say manger scene, Mary, and it would just be like 3 heads, and you don't even know what that is. So that's a perfect example of actually just capitulating. And in so doing, radicalizing Muslims even more, emboldening them, because you're showing them, these people, they're weak. Let's take over.
I think there's a bit of victimhood as well. That victimhood kind of grows the more you're given. It's the same thing as what you're saying, the entitled feeling. But if you have years and years where they won't show the manger scene, or they don't say Happy Christmas or Merry Christmas, then when someone does say Merry Christmas, each individual Muslim probably does feel like, hey, okay, guys, we'd agreed about this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what happens, because you've accustomed them to being a pansy. So how dare you now, try to, we've already agreed we don't want to see these things, and you gave in. Yeah.
Shit. Do you think how deep does this go in terms of elites, in terms of globalists, Davos, that kind of class of people getting embedded with the Muslim Brotherhood, say?
I think there's levels to it. The highest echelons. I think it's that sort of thing. The globalists who very consciously know what they're doing. The Soros mentality. Okay, that's there. But then the rank and file are just your average person, including a lot of these politicians. They're just they're so part of the matrix they can't even think or realize what they're doing is wrong or bad because they've been drinking the Kool-Aid more than anyone. So they really believe in this stuff. They're the ultimate useful idiots, and they're more the masses. And then the real masses, of course, would be the typical left woke person who's not even a politician, but he's brainwashed by I don't know, social media or whatever. So I think it is a little bit top down in that sense. But yeah, I also think there has to be some, the top echelon has to be conscious of what it's doing. And whatever that agenda is, globalization. I recall, what was his name? A famous UK politician.
Powell or someone.
During Bush's era.
Other than Blair,
yeah. Like apparently back then he said something like that. Like, yeah, my goal is to make sure that Britain becomes global.
He said something like to stick one in the eye of every. I need to figure. I'm going to look that up. But when you're next, I'm going to have a look at what that was. The Kool-Aid thing about drinking the Kool-Aid. Yeah, that was Flavor Aid, and it got changed to Kool-Aid. It was Flavor Aid, and it was.
Was it?
It was the Jonestown tragedy. Do you know?
Okay.
He took them to. He was a nutter in charge of the cult, and he took them, Jim Jones, to some South American place and set them all up there, and then they all drunk Flavor Aid with probably cyanide or some sort of poison, and they all died.
Yeah.
But it just shows what an ideology can do.
Exactly.
That is the perfect example of it, I think. God. And then I'm going to look that up in a second about what Blair actually said, because you're right, which is fascinating.
And that's way back then, so his
Well, there was, you mentioned 9/11 at the beginning. It's really like, that was sort of a moment where we could have gone one of like two ways. And the reaction after that was all the Hollywood guys coming out and even Bush saying Islam is a religion of peace. It's that's why I want to get onto this like elite side of it. I mean, I was told recently the Muslim Brotherhood is 50 years into a 100-year plan. It was Charles Asher Small was telling me about that. Have you looked into that?
I don't know particularly about 50, 100 year, but I do know they definitely work very incrementally. I think in 2009. The FBI busted all these Muslim Brotherhood documents, which including famous organizations like CARE in the U.S., and it literally said that we are engaged in a civilizational jihad against America in this case, and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to use their own system against them until we sabotage their miserable house. These are verbatim quotes. The civilizational jihad, the sabotage, the miserable house. So it's and that's how these things always are. They're very long-term, very incremental, very subtle. You have to do it incrementally. That's how people get used to it, right? You introduce something very subtle in the beginning and then give it a few years and people accept it. That's the new norm. And then you go a little further. So that definitely is an agenda of the Brotherhood and all sorts of Islamists. That's what makes the Brotherhood type more dangerous than the ISIS type. The ISIS type, you know what you're dealing with. Just pure savage carnage. Yeah. But the Muslim Brotherhood type is the sort that they use the West's own infrastructure and system against it, and like I said, do it subtly and incrementally.
Because that was remarkable that you had the president right after the biggest terrorist attack ever coming out and saying it is a religion of peace.
Yeah, and this is back in 2001, before wokery.
Yeah, we had even 15 years ago we had in the UK there were documentaries on the BBC about the Islamic infiltration of the UK and what was really happening, the radicalization of the mosques. We had people looking at certain towns and going back to their hometown and saying, shit, what's gone on here, this is crazy. And then silence. Like it got to that point, it's like it passed that point and now there's no more. Does the average American, do they just have no idea what's about to hit them?
Yeah, probably. The average American, unfortunately, just, I imagine like the average Westerner, just their noses on their phone, social media. And the worst part is, then some of them are watching Fox News or whatever, CNN, and they think they're informed. And I don't know. I don't know if you're informed or indoctrinated. Okay, so a lot of, it seems to me the people who think they're informed are the least informed because it's kind of like the same phenomena of what's going on with public school systems. You go there and you think you're the educated one, but your head's been filled with all sorts of nonsense, including woke nonsense nowadays. So I think by and large, obviously it's hard to say, but a lot of people I think viscerally understand something's wrong here too, but they can't put their finger on it. And I think one of the reasons for this is, like I said, we keep looking at symptoms, not root causes. And the symptoms, so Islam is a symptom. Islam in the West is a symptom. It's not the root cause. And the root causes, as all root causes are ultimately more philosophical. And that's why they're harder to kind of pinpoint and understand. And usually they've taken generations to actually mature and permeate society. But in this particular case, for example, that's why I say, okay, let's say the West, UK, okay, could tomorrow take care of the Islam problem. They could. Physically, they have the capacity to do it. They have the authority to do it, all right? But the mentality has so changed. In other words, if all the native Brits living here, okay, the white native Brits were replaced by their great-grandparents, okay, including the government, the Islam problem would be solved in a few days, okay?
And what would they have to do? What would be done?
Even if it would be something like, hey, you know what? We don't want to live with you people in the way you are. We're going to send you straight back to your countries. We're going to give you an allowance, some money. But that's just the way it is. What are you going to do about it? Okay, but now the philosophical underpinnings of their descendants is such that I can never even conceive of doing that because I'm a humanist, because that might traumatize someone. Because, see, all these sorts of things that have crept into the Western epistemology have paralyzed people. Yeah. Okay, so it's not that it can't be done. It can be done. Lots of things can be done. You know, the UK can go back to being merry old England if it wants in any time. Okay, but due to these really paralyzing philosophies that have just permeated the culture so much and the epistemology, people can't act. All they can do is talk about this new party, this new politician, I'm going to vote. But if you zoom out and look at what's happening, it's just been a complete downhill spiral. It doesn't matter, you know.
The ideology behind multiculturalism, individualism, the liberty that we've had in the 1900s and the early 2000s in the UK and the US and Europe, it's really strong. And it's really attractive, so that even I've been doing this show called Heretics, which is, you know, against a lot of the mainstream and so on. Even I've balked at the idea of but sending people back who are individuals who live here. And I'm only getting to the point now. It's taken years of speaking to people like you every other day for 2.5 years to even get to a point where I'm going, oh shit, maybe we've got no choice. And so you'd have to sit like Clockwork Orange. You'd have to sit the average person down, hold their eyes open for 2 years. Yeah. That's how you get people out of cults. It's slow.
Yeah,
you can't.
I know. But there isn't much time for that. That's the problem.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. Shit, man. I don't know. And then they would say, a lot of those people would say, as a Scientologist would say, of anyone who's disagreeing with them, they're a suppressive person. Those are the words they use. They go, don't listen to them, basically. They would say that that you and I are radicalized.
Yeah. And we're blackpilling.
Yeah. How do we make them realize we're not? Or maybe we are.
I'm not radicalized. I'm just normal.
That's what everyone says, though. That's like people saying, I don't have an accent.
I see your point, but what I'm saying is I'm just telling you how things work historically and how things can work today. If you want something done, look, if you're going to define your culture and your policies by the way they are defined, which is, you know, the human rights, and of course I'm not attacking human rights, but they've also been weaponized, you have to understand. All these terms. Multiculturalism, you know, what's so great about when you think about it, do you know what a culture is? They seem to think that cultures are exotic food. No, actually a culture is a distinct worldview. So how is it great when you get a society where everyone has a different worldview, different priorities, different ethics, and you throw them in together? That's good. I think I'd prefer homogeneity. You know what I mean? That's how a country should be. Now, it's one thing to say different races. I have no problem with that, as long as they all share the same, you know, the same priorities and the same culture. Okay, that can work. But to bring in and celebrate the fact that everyone believes in something differently, okay, so even in and of itself, that's insane. Why would any country want that? And we celebrate that?
It makes no sense.
Yeah. So people don't, they don't get it. They've been duped.
It's a beautiful word as well.
It's a beautiful wall. It's been made beautiful, okay? And like I said,
Multicultural.
most people think it means instead of walking out of my bland British house and just seeing a bunch of white people all stuffy, I'm going to see exotic Indians and I'm going to see a turbaned man and I'm going to go get really authentic food. And wow, that's awesome. That's multiculturalism. Well, no, actually, the real thing about multiculturalism is all those people have a different worldview than you. Completely different.
They'll fight each other.
Yeah.
There's a reason. I said this to someone recently. I said, would you go and live in Pakistan? And he said, no. We were having an argument. And he said, no. And I said, well, why not? And he's like, well, I don't know, actually. Well, maybe I would. I haven't. And I was like, no, you wouldn't live. He said, no, because I haven't been there. And I said, there's a reason you haven't fucking been there.
Is he Pakistani?
No.
Oh.
But because he was just like, he was fine with the influx of Pakistani community.
Right.
So I said, would you live there? Because that's what we're bringing here. Yeah. And he started by saying like, no, I wouldn't. And then he continued by saying, well, I haven't been there actually. So maybe
I will.
Yeah.
So he's lying. He's trying to save face.
Yeah, maybe I would live there in Pakistan. It's like, I know so many people who were quite woke or multicultural who've gone on holiday to India with their girlfriends or wives and walked down the street and had the most appalling, that is what has to happen, I think, with the 50, 60 million Brits, and Americans, they all have to go on holiday with their blonde wives and walk down the street in India. Yeah. In not in every city.
Well, or just here in London, right?
Yeah, well, that's it. It's a joke. What is going on? Tell me a little bit and relatively briefly, but what's happened in Iran? So there was a Shah, then there's this. What's gone on?
Yeah, as far as the minute to minute thing, I don't think anyone knows. There seems to be a kind of a clampdown, which makes sense during war. You don't want to actually say what's going on, but the Shah, of course, is the original guy who was secular, and it's his son that I think the U.S. is supporting and trying to supplant and bring him in.
Yeah.
And Iran's, the history of Iran and its actual, who it is, it's so different than most of the Muslim world. It's very, very different. So first of all, it's the only nation that got conquered very early, but it kept its language, which is very bizarre. Okay. All the other countries, my people, the Copts of Egypt, they had their own language. It's the Coptic language, it's the Pharaonic language. It exists only in the liturgy in church. It's not a spoken language anymore. That's why we call 22 or 23 countries Arab countries, because their first language is Arabic.
Right. Coptic came from the ancient Egyptian.
Yeah. It's the final form of the ancient. So
you don't use hieroglyphics in it.
No, we use a Greek alphabet and 7 different characters that don't exist. But it's the same words, so it's spelled with Greek alphabet.
Wow.
But so if you hear a Coptic liturgy, that's how the pharaohs would have sounded.
That's amazing.
It is kind of cool.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And so Iran is different. What do they? It's not Persian, is it? What's the language?
Persian, Farsi.
Farsi.
That's what they speak, and also they kept their culture. And then when they become Shia Muslims, which is the heretical Muslim form. Most of them are Sunnis, so they're the outcasts, which is the minority, 10%. And they have a kind of a different theology. So they have this hidden imam, okay? Imam, you may know the word from Sunnis, like a prayer leader. Their imam means like the great leader who's sort of almost like an immaculate. He's a descendant of Muhammad, ultimately, right. Through his daughter, Fatima and Ali. And Iran's a 12-er Shia. They have numbers. There's 5-er, 7. 12-er means, the 12th Imam is the one that disappeared, and he's still alive. I think he disappeared around 800 or 900, and he's going to come back. Okay, right. So very, very mystical, esoteric. And the Ayatollah, Ayatollah means like the miracle of Allah. Okay, it's A as the same word for verse, which is like anyway. He's like his representative. Now, the issue, what's interesting about all this is the eschatological component of Shia Islam gives cause to pause, especially when we talk about nuclear weapons, because their end days deal with this Mahdi figure. And Mahdi means the guided one, and also he's going to help bring the hidden imam. Okay, but to do that, there has to be a cataclysmic showdown with the enemies of Islam, in this case, Shia Islam, which are named, we know them, the 2 great Satans, all right, Israel and America. So that's why when you think of nuclear powers, you usually think of the balance of powers. It's a deterrence. You have it, I have it. No one's going to use it. The mentality of this group, Iran, is a little more risque, because they might use something like that to usher in the day they've all been waiting for, which is when the great Imam returns. And this isn't just my theory. A lot of scholarly papers have been written about that particular aspect of that. And it really permeates, especially the Islamic Republican Guard Corps, which is in charge of Iran. And, honestly, the taking out of the Ayatollah, I don't know how good that was. I think they were counting on a decapitation strike, which, to my knowledge, has never worked. But they've made a martyr of him. And it's, if anything, it seems, again, depending on who you talk to, but it seems like it may be galvanizing a significant portion of the Iranian people.
So it's a weird country then, because you've got this country, as you said, that doesn't have Arabic. It hasn't. So it seems like it's almost more secular at the first glance.
Well, that's the thing. The people are supposedly very secular, but they're governed by this mullah, the theocracy. But there's also, a sort of relationship. He's like this nice grandfatherly figure, and we respect him, and that's why I don't think smart to kill him. What authority did he have? He was like an 80-plus-year-old man. It's not like he was the one making all the decisions. So I don't know how smart that was. If anything, that might have like pushed even the Iranians to be more supportive. Kind of like, look at these people; they're treacherous. They killed this old man. So I don't know. I don't know if that was really a good move to help overall. But again, I think they were just banking on it. The whole thing's going to collapse if we kill him. I think they have to kill maybe the whole, IRG, Islamic Republican Guard, before that happens.
I suppose no one knows the exact numbers, but it feels like there's this real secular group of Iranians or Iranians that I've met loads of them in England. And they're always great people.
Yeah,
they're just these great people.
They are.
And then there's like super extreme Muslims.
Yeah.
It's like those two are there.
Yeah.
And then, so how big is the super extreme?
That's the question, right?
Yeah.
And it depends on who you talk to. Some people tell me, it's 95% they're secular. Cool.
Ah.
And then I'll meet someone else. He's like, no, it's more like 60% are kind of, it's not that they're radical, but they're conservative, which means they do back the regime for heritage reasons, for pride, for honor. We're not going to, who are these infidels to come and kill this old man, who maybe we don't like him, but he represents us. It's that honor culture. Okay.
Shit.
Yeah.
Is there any chance you think that it gets overthrown? Maybe the Shah comes back in? Or,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. I don't know what's going on, but that definitely is a plausible possibility. Or not even necessarily the Shah. It just could be just someone else who is
politically elected.
Politically elected,
Probably
and
elects
ideally, pro-US, pro-Western, pro-Israel.
That's unlikely, though, isn't it? I mean, are there examples? I think you mentioned Spain before of this kind of, when Islam gets embedded in with the elite establishment, where they've then been pushed back out, and a country, a culture has been regained. Are there other examples aside from that Spanish?
Are there other examples?
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about like where, let's say, conquered people pushed out Islam?
Yeah.
Oh, there's plenty. You have to remember that if you look at the 7th century, when Islam starts spreading through Jihad, essentially, if you want to talk about, let's just talk about the Christian world or Christendom, which people thought was Europe. It was actually not even all of Europe. It was southwest of the Danube and Rhine, but it was mostly North Africa and mostly the Middle East, what we call. So I'll think of all those Middle Eastern countries: Syria, Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Syria, of course, Egypt, Libya, all the way to Morocco, and Asia Minor, Turkey. All of that was Christian, more Christian. That's why Constantine, the Roman emperor, moved his capital to the east, because that's where it all was. Now, all of that was conquered in 1 century, by Islam. And that's why it's kind of funny, because people seem to think that that area was always somehow kind of like Muslim or turban-wearing people. Well, actually, that was a more sophisticated, richer, and even theologically advanced portion of the Christian world. You had 5 major centers known as sees. One was in Rome. The other 4, which were just as equal, were all absorbed and conquered by Islam: Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and later Constantinople. So think about that. Now, as far as those, so who did actually, the ones that so the Muslim world as we know it, MENA, Middle East, North Africa, obviously those people were not able to get rid of Islam, but there were uprisings, believe it or not, here and there. But people forget, Southeast Europe, the Balkans were conquered by Islam. Under the Ottomans. They came all the way up to Vienna. Hungary was conquered. That's why Hungary says, we don't want Muslims. We know what it's like to live with Muslims, because we were conquered for 150 years. But a lot of the other Balkan nations were too. Russia, you may have heard of the Tatar or the Mongol yoke. Well, they became Muslim. And it was the same paradigm immediately engulfed Russia, where, the Muslim master, you're the infidel, you have to pay the tribute and live. So the whole thing there. So, but all those countries did manage to push Islam out, Russia and the Balkans and Hungary. But that was much later than Spain, because they got conquered later. And, basically, let's say Hungary got freed of Islam completely and totally in the 1700s. Okay. Greece was under the Ottoman yoke. We know what the Ottomans did to the Armenians and the Assyrians and the Greeks. Okay.
It's just difficult because all of those countries, they were in a time where they didn't have this kind of multiculturalism and this human rights era.
Right. Yeah. So they were more normal and down to earth, and they knew what it was.
We'd have to act in a way that is not. We just won't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got one more question for you, but where can people find your work and all of that?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I have a Substack, which I think is in my name, Substack page. And also my books, you can find them on my website, RaymondIbrahim.com, or on Amazon. My newest book just came out, Two Swords of Christ, which actually deals with a lot of these themes, and a lot of people are liking it. And I hope my YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah, of course, as well. Well, we're linked to all of that. I hope people do go and check it out, because it's so important that people, if nothing else, be informed.
Yeah.
That's essential. So they need to be informed. So I hope people will go and check all of that out. Who is a heretic you admire?
A heretic I admire? That's a good question. Oh, I know. Vlad the Impaler.
Go on.
Well, Vlad the Impaler, as we know him, Dracula, is, of course, a demonized figure. By all means, a heretic, of course. Most Christians would literally call him a heretic. But in the real history that I delve into and talk about, I have a whole chapter about him, actually, in one of my books, Defenders of the West, the Christian heroes who stood against Islam. I look at the primary sources, and what I see is, he engaged in violence and brutality, but so did everyone else. And he was really weakened and outnumbered, so he engaged in a little bit more to make a point. But if you look at who he was, he identified himself as a Christian, Orthodox in this case, and he was fighting to defend his people from the Muslims, the Ottoman Turks, who were coming and demanding boys to become janissaries. That's what they would do. They would take Christian boys and force them to become jihadists.
Wow.
Yeah, and enslavement and all that. So he got very brutal in order to fight that back. And it's in Romania, his homeland, and also in a lot of Eastern Europe, he's seen as a hero. But here in the West, a heretic just begins to touch on who he is. He's actually a blood-sucking demon that, sleeps by day and sleeps in a coffin by day, which he wasn't.
That's a great heretic. That's the first time he's been mentioned as a heretic. I like that.